How about there? There we go. All right. Well, that's embarrassing. We're 4 minutes into the show, and you're only now able to hear me. So thank you for giving me that heads up, Denise. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, so that's the first lesson, that you need to keep an eye on things when you're doing these shows and make sure that everything is coming through correctly. I have no idea why it was muted, because it shouldn't have been, but it was. So hopefully you can hear me now. Go ahead and comment if you are able to hear me, because it will be a much more productive show if we do that. So now we're going to crank that rewind button. Hey, I'm Chip Griffin. I'm the host of Agency Leadership Live, and I'm going to show you how not to do online video today. No, seriously, we'll go behind the scenes. We'll be taking a look at everything that we've got here in the studio. As I was saying to absolutely nobody but myself, since my sound was off, this is a dual purpose space. So I've built a studio that is designed to be used for both work as well as for video productions. And so I needed to come up with something that would accommodate both of those needs. It's also a 15 by 15 foot room. It's an old guest bedroom in my house that I repurposed about a year ago to be my home office. And so it's a small space. It's also a space that, in addition to using as my home office and studio, is also used as sort of my personal den where I read or watch TV or something like that if I'm not sitting with the rest of the family. So I really needed something that was going to serve those purposes. And of course, I also was trying to find something that, since we're in the midst of a pandemic and economic uncertainty and all that, I wanted to try to find the best way to do this as affordably as possible. I wanted to balance quality with the amount of money that I was going to spend, because now is not the time to go out and make extravagant purchases generally. And so I've repurposed a lot of things that I already had, perhaps for previous podcasting or some other video efforts that I've done over the years. I tried to repurpose some of the things that I have here. So for example, all of the desktops here are just leftover construction lumber that I had out of my workshop that I glued up into tabletop spaces. So there's a lot of that we'll look at as we go through this, and so you'll see that there are a lot of things that you can do that don't necessarily require a lot of money. And of course, video gear is particularly challenging to come by right now. It's a little bit easier than it was a few months ago, but because so many people are doing Zoom calls and webinars and live streams like these, there's a high demand for video products generally, whether that's cameras or microphone gear or some of the computer gear that you might be using for it. So some of the things are more expensive than they should be. Some of the things are delayed as far as how they are available. So instead of being available on a couple of days' notice, it may be weeks. And so it took me a lot longer to put this together than it would have in normal times. And anytime you're putting something like this together, there's going to be a lot of trial and error. So you want to make sure that you're ready for that you're going to roll with those punches. And finally, I would say, before we start digging into the specific gear and some of the things that I've got going here, some of what I have is overkill. And part of that's because I like to tinker. I'm kind of a tech geek. And part of it is because, honestly, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so if that's you, keep that in mind, because that's going to require a lot more effort and a lot more money on your part if you skew in that direction. So I'll also talk about some of the things where you can make some compromises in what you're doing, because ultimately, as long as you can be heard, and of course that's ironic given the way I started this show without any audio, but as long as you can be heard, as long as you can be seen pretty well, and as long as you're creating good content, people will be interested in what you have going. So, and Joseph Jaffe says, overkill is my middle name. Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. What are you going to do? So since I gave it before my audio was fixed, if you want to get all of the gear list for this, you don't need to write anything down. It is going to be available, or is available, by going to agencyleadership.com/studio, and it will take you to this article that I wrote that's got a detailed listing of all of the gear that I'm using in this space. And so, all right, let's go ahead and start with the camera, because that is probably the most important thing when you're thinking about video. And so what I'm using here is a Sony a6100 camera. And so that is a mirrorless camera. It is an interchangeable lens camera, and I've got a Sigma 16mm lens, 1.4 on it that is really good, as you can see, at blurring the background. And that was something that was important to me. I wanted to get the feeling of depth in my studio. And that was particularly important because I don't have a lot of space. It looks like I'm farther away from the wall than I am, but it's only about 3 feet from the back of my head to the wall back there. And so it's a compact space. I've got basically this whole studio setup is in an 8-foot by 8-foot space, maybe even a little less than that. So 60 square feet is all that it takes to put this together. And as we go through this, you'll see that I've got a number of different camera angles that I've been able to set up. So we can take a look from all sorts of different perspectives. And of course, you've got to move around to see some of them. But there's a lot of flexibility in what I've set up so that I can do different things. I even have an overhead shot here so that if I wanted to write something or draw or show off a product, which I'll do later, I can do that. And so this is all able to be done in a relatively small space, which is nice. So the camera and lens are, they were probably, I guess, the biggest investment that I made for this setup in particular. And so between the two, it's probably about $600, $650 for the camera and lens. So not cheap. But I saw it as an investment because it is something that I'll be able to use for a long time and really does immediately signal to a viewer that there's the potential for quality here. Obviously, I have to follow through with the content that I'm creating, but the first impression is really important. And so I think the primary video camera that you're using is important from that perspective. Now, the camera itself, in order to get it into the computer, and let's go ahead and let's bring up a shot here of the studio. And in a little bit, we'll go for a little bit of a tour. But let's see, we'll bring up, let's see, can we get it? There we go. It's on screen now. So if you look here, you can see that the camera is perched right above the monitor. And so I guess it's about an arm's length from my face. So it's very close. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted a 16mm lens, because by having a lens that is that wide, it allows me to bring the camera very close to me. If I had something where, say, I was using a 35 or a 50mm lens, it would have to be set farther back. And so that then creates problems because since this is also a workspace, I need to have my monitors and things around me. And so it would be a lot harder to navigate around that if I had a less wide lens. And so that's one of the things that makes that important. And by having a really wide aperture at 1.4, it really allows me to make sure that I've got that quality going as far as the blurred background. Roxanne asked, can you get these used or refurbished? Yes, and so there are other cameras as well that would work that are similar to this one. So an earlier sort of generation of this would be the Sony A5100. That's a very popular camera amongst video bloggers and live streamers. And one of the reasons why the Sony cameras in particular are popular is because they tend not to overheat. They tend to produce what's called clean HDMI, which is really important if you're going to be using a camera instead of a webcam for your setup, because a lot of cameras out there, and I come from this as a Canon guy, so I do photography, sports photography, street photography, that kind of thing, and I've used Canons for years and years. And so I love Canons. I have an inordinate amount of Canon gear in the closet just on the other side of this camera. But those didn't work particularly well for this live streaming setup because those cameras, they tend to shut down after 15 to 30 minutes. They're not really well designed for use in this kind of live streaming environment. So you'll find that most people who are doing live streaming with interchangeable cameras are going to be using Sonys. And I have to say, I've been using this one for a few months now, and I've been very happy with it. And frankly, it's making me rethink using Canon for the rest of what I do, because it would be certainly convenient to have just one system so that I can use the lenses interchangeably for different things. So if I want to go do a video shoot away from my desk, I can use a different lens that might be more appropriate for that environment, but then I can also use that for some of my photography interests as well. So there are going to be some of those things that you need to think about. Canon has come out with some software that allows you to use a lot of their DSLR cameras, for example, as webcams. I tried that. It was pretty clunky. It didn't give you great quality. And so I think that Canon is certainly moving in the direction of trying to be more friendly to folks who want to do video with their DSLRs in a live streaming type environment, but they're not there yet. So Sony is definitely where it's at. You can find some less expensive cameras. You can find some deals in the used and refurbished space. It's a little tough right now because there's so much demand for them right now. The lens is something where you can also compromise a bit if you don't need or you don't care about the blurred background as much as I do. You can get a more expensive lens that doesn't have that. You can get a zoom lens so that you've got some more flexibility as far as placement. Right? With this one, the only way I can change the width of the shot is by moving the camera physically backward and forward. So if I bring the camera closer to me, you'll see less of this background. If I pull it farther away, you'll see more of it. But I can't do anything by keeping the camera in its same place to change that, at least from the camera's perspective. I could crop it in my video program, but that's not a great solution. So, there are some things that you need to think about with your own setup and what your placement of things is going to be. Let's see. So because it's not a traditional webcam, you have to have some way to get it into the computer. And so the way I do that, and we'll bring out a little bit more technology here. Let's go ahead and bring up my iPhone, which I can use as a camera, and you'll see this here. Let's bring the overhead shot in. So you can see here that the iPhone can become a camera. It's using an application called NDI-HX. And so what that's going to let me do is show you some things around the studio. And so let's go ahead and bring up the iPhone here, and we'll get to the Stream Deck here a little bit later. But if we go back here, you can see this device. It's called an HDMI capture card. And this particular one is an AJA UTAP HDMI capture card. And you can see on the close side, there's an HDMI cable running in. That's coming from my Sony camera. And then there's a USB cable running out that goes to the computer. And so what this allows me to do is convert the signal from the camera into something that my computer can use as a webcam. And so in fact, I can use this Sony camera in just about any application, whether it's I use a product called vMix for doing this video production. It can be used by StreamYard, which is very popular. I saw Joseph Jaffe is here, and he uses StreamYard for his production, I believe. And then it can also be used as a webcam in Zoom or Skype or those kinds of things. So those capture cards are really nice. The one I have is a relatively high-end one. To be honest, it was the only one that was available a few months ago when I was looking for one. Those have been one of the things that's been in the most demand and the most difficult to find. I do have a link to another one that I have. I can't show it to you right now because it's actually tucked up under the desk, but I'm using that one on this secondary camera over here. And so that one only cost about $25, whereas the AJA UTAP I think was about $250. So huge difference in price. And so they've just recently come out with some of these really inexpensive ones. They're basically no-name brands. They're available on Amazon. There's a whole flood of them. I saw some YouTubers had tested them out, and I said, well, for 25 bucks, I'll take a flyer on it and see. And I tested it, and it works pretty well. It's not quite as good, and so that's why I'm using it on my secondary camera. It does 30 frames per second versus 60. So really, from a practical standpoint, what that means is that if I'm moving around, it'll look a little bit more stuttery or jerky. To be honest, I haven't used it for prolonged periods, so I don't know if there's any degradation over time of the quality, or if it gets bogged down, or those kinds of things. But it's something to look at, and you might take that chance on one of the more inexpensive options to see if it works for you. Particularly because if you're going to invest in the camera, maybe you postpone getting the higher end capture card. These capture cards can come in both 1080 and 4K resolutions. For live streaming, 1080 is just fine. That's what I'm using here. 4K is nice, but it's going to really bog down your signal if you're live streaming, so I wouldn't recommend it for those purposes. It will it eats up a lot of your bandwidth at your home or your office, and just it's not really going to add a lot to the viewer's experience. So go ahead and stick with 1080. All right. The other thing you need with your camera, and I have a link to this as well, is a dummy battery. And so the reason why you need what's called a dummy battery is if you just use the battery that comes with the camera, it's going to run out of charge, and so you're going to have to constantly recharge it. It'll be misery for you if that happens in the middle of a live stream or a meeting, so you don't want that to happen. So a dummy battery, basically, it looks like a real camera battery, but it has a cord that runs out to a power adapter, and you plug it in. And so it gives constant power to your camera, which is really convenient and allows you to keep going for as long as the camera will allow. And the Sony a6100 is pretty good about not shutting down at any point, so that's good. It doesn't overheat as some other cameras may tend to do. So lots of advantages there. Dummy battery is certainly something that you want to look for. It's pretty inexpensive. It's probably $20 or so, and very much a worthwhile investment. All right, so as we continue moving around the gear, let me show you briefly this second camera angle. This is a Sony HVR V1U professional camcorder that I got probably 13 or 14 years ago. And so it's a decent camera, as you can see. It's got very good quality. I mean, to be honest with you, it would be totally overkill. Typically, I don't think they sell this particular model anymore. It is fairly old. At the time, it was something that was used for some TV production and those kinds of things. So it was dramatic overkill when I got it, but I had some businesses that were doing some video production at the time, so it made sense to have something like that, and I needed something that could allow me to film events and do things along those lines. But it's in the lines of repurposing. I had it. It was gathering dust. I was able to bring it into the scene and start using it for my studio so I could have a different angle, sort of one that shows me perhaps if I wanted to show myself working on screen, kind of that side-on view, or just, to mix things up, I can turn and look to it. But the other advantage here is you always want to be thinking about having some degree of redundancy. So I've had some of these live streams where one of my cameras has had a problem, and so having another one allows me to keep going. Obviously, if I'm foolish and manage to shut the audio off entirely, that's not going to work out too well, but otherwise you can recover from a lot of things. So that's another option to use, and look around, see what you might have that might work, and if it's something you already own, there's no harm in testing it. Now, I do have some other cameras, as I talked about. I've got this overhead view, which is this is my old webcam that I use, and it's actually a pretty decent webcam. It's a Logitech C920. If you wanted to use it in general for your video needs, it would work out pretty well for you. It's not going to have the blurry background and that sort of thing, but it does do a decent job of producing HD video. So in my case, I'm now able to use it for this overhead view, which is nice because sometimes I do like to draw a diagram or something like that, and I can show it off quite easily that way. And then I have an even older webcam that I hooked up because, again, it's gathering dust, and as long as I've got it, I might as well use it. And so this is just another angle that I can use. And so this is a Logitech C270. And so it's only a 720p camera, so it's not going to be as good a quality, but it's nice to have. And the other thing I can do with this one, because it's not anchored to anything, is I can take it and spin it around and show different parts of the scene if I want to. Now, I've shown a couple of times this Stream Deck that I have in front of me, so why don't we talk about that briefly. The Stream Deck is from a company called Elgato, and they produce a lot of live video streaming equipment. They primarily cater to people who are streaming games, but it's useful for other things as well. And so you can probably see here, let's see if I can bring this up. Actually, you know what? We'll switch over to the iPhone camera because that will, I think, let me get in a little bit closer on this. So there we go. There's the iPhone camera. We'll take my fingers off the lens. There we go. So now you should be able to see it pretty well. And if you look at this, you will see that this gives me all sorts of buttons to control different aspects of what's going on the scene. And so it gives me the ability to look at, and I just turned it off because I hit the wrong button. There we go. This is the challenge of being the video producer and the host at the same time. So it gives me the ability to do things like change the lower third on the screen. So if I wanted to bring up the title of today's show, I can just hit this button and it will show up on screen, or I can hit it again and turn it off. I have the ability to run, switch back over to the main camera. So it's a nice little device. It's got folders so you can set up different shows. I have one that's set up just for when I'm doing straight webcam things on Zoom, where it doesn't have all of the fancy branded elements, but does still allow me to use the different things and screen share and such, those kinds of things. So a lot of flexibility in the Stream Deck. It's not inexpensive, it's a couple $100, but for me it was worthwhile because even though I've screwed up a few things today, it does make it a lot easier to introduce the different elements into the show without spending as much time staring at the screen and figuring out what to click on. So something to think about there. Now let's talk about lighting. Lighting is very important whenever you're talking about video, because if you don't have good lighting, then you're not going to be able to have a good image. And so I spent a lot of time tweaking the lighting, and part of the reason why I did that was because I wear glasses. If you wear glasses, your lighting is going to be much more challenging because you generally don't want, if you don't wear glasses, you can often put just a ring light or something like that behind the camera, straight on, good, clean, balanced light on your face. The ring light puts a nice little circle in the center of your eyes, which can be appealing and flattering. But if you have glasses, then you've got to look at putting the lights off in different places and finding an angle that works. Again, because I'm in a space where I'm using this for functional purposes too, I needed to try to find places to put the lights that it was going to be as unobtrusive as possible. So let's go ahead and we'll bring up the photo here of the space. And you can see that I've got these two lights here, and these are Neewer 660 LED lights. And so they're square LED panels inside, and I've got matching soft boxes that I put on them. And the purpose of the soft box is to diffuse the light, make it a little bit softer, more gentle. Without them, the light is a lot stronger and harsher. It does have the ability to control the intensity. You can see there are a couple of dials on the back here that allow you to change the color and intensity. And color, it's always going to be white, but is it a soft white? Is it a cool white? Is it daylight light? All that kind of stuff. You can control that from on there. And so there's a link in the post to those. This one here is on an Elgato multi-mount. So it's just a stand that clips to my desk. And so one of the things I was trying to do when I first set this up, I had tripods all the way around for holding the camera and the lights and all that. And so with those tripod type stands, there were just a lot of legs hanging out there, and I kept tripping over them, which was not particularly helpful. So I got that one. And then this one here, in order to save some space, I mounted it up on the wall. And I'll show you in a moment what that attachment looks like. But basically, it's a stand that screws into the wall and pops out. So it takes away the need for having a vertical stand there, which is helpful. So I've got those. Then if you look behind the shelves here, I've got LED strip lighting. Same with the tabletop. You can actually see it right down there where there's an LED strip. And so I've got that, and it makes the shelves have a little bit more depth to them. And so that's a nice touch. I've got a light here behind the monitor, and then I've got a blue light behind this computer as well, just to add a splash of color to the background. And you can see here that it adds just a little bit of interest to the scene, so it's not just quite as bland. And then usually I'll have just my regular desktop on this computer behind me set up. So again, it just adds a little bit of color to the background, and it allows me to display my logo, which is sort of a nice touch. So think about the placement of some of those things. You can see in the background I've also got some various sports memorabilia, those kind of things to personalize it, because I'm a Red Sox fan. That's what I chose to go with. And now let's take a look behind that. So if you look behind that, there is a wall, and so I'm facing into the corner, which helps with that perception of depth. But one of the things that I didn't like about this room is the ugly wallpaper. And so let me go ahead and bring up the iPhone so I can show you what the wallpaper looks like. And I'm sure that some people would think that this colonial wallpaper is just beautiful, but I didn't think it was particularly beautiful. And so I decided that I would use a photo backdrop of a brick wall. And actually what I've done is I've used two of them, and they meet in the corner there. They overlap, and I tried to match them up so that they looked more or less realistic. And I've attached them to the wall like wallpaper. And you can see over here that I've even done it so that the light switch goes through it, and I've also done the outlets down below as well, and the shelves themselves are attached through the photo backdrop. So it really has allowed me to make it look more realistic. I've hung the photos, for example, on it as well, and so it gives that sort of that warmer impression of the brick as opposed to that busy look of the wallpaper, without forcing me to strip all the wallpaper and paint or repaper or something like that, which is not something that I was particularly interested in doing. I'm not particularly handy with those things, and so this was a better solution. The other thing is that as a very pale-skinned, bald-headed guy, I needed a darker background so that I would stand out a little bit better and not just blend in with it. So those were some of the considerations when it came to setting up the background. The other thing that's very important with video is the sound. And I came to all of this from a background of having been podcasting for a really long time. I first did some audio shows back in the 1990s, actually. I did my first online interview shows in 1999 and 2000, back when you had to use basically what was the equivalent of a phone tap on a plain old telephone line in order to do recordings. Now, of course, podcasting is a whole lot easier, but as a result, I have accumulated an incredible number of microphones and lots of audio gear. So as you look through the gear list that I've put together, you'll see some fairly high-end stuff and things that, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily recommend to you today, but they can be useful if you've got them hanging around. So let's go ahead and start with the main microphone, what you're listening to me on right now. And what you're listening to me on right now is a shotgun microphone. So again, we'll bring up the iPhone so that I can show it to you. There we go. So if we go up here, you can see that the shotgun microphone is right above the desk. It is literally, I don't know, just about, we'll switch views here, just about that far from my mouth. So it's very close. And so it works really well if I'm talking into camera one here. It is something that actually didn't cost me anything because it was one that was included with that Sony camcorder that I showed you earlier. It was just attached to the top. I detached it and repurposed it for these purposes, and I have it off of a boom arm so that I can adjust it and get it just out of camera shot. So if I bring it down just a hair, you can now see that it's right there in the camera shot. So you want it just as close as possible in order to get the best quality audio. But now while that's a great option, it doesn't work everywhere. Sometimes I want to have better audio quality, and so if I'm doing a podcast where I'm okay having the microphone in the shot, then I will use this, which is my favorite microphone of all time. It is a Shure SM7B. It's used by a lot of talk radio hosts. I've had this one forever and really enjoy it, and so I'll switch over. And you should be able to hear me now on this one, and hopefully you're noticing a difference in the audio quality. It should sound a lot warmer, richer, and a little bit more like a radio voice kind of thing. But it does have to be in the shot in order to get that effect. If I move it so that it's not visible, you won't have that same quality. And so, but if I'm doing a podcast and I'm doing video with it, it sort of gives that behind-the-scenes look, sort of like when they'll simulcast a radio show on TV and everybody looks like a radio host. So there's a time and place for this, and so I do use it for those. And I also use this microphone if I'm doing voiceovers for some of my videos where I'm not going to be on camera, but I'm simply narrating something, whether it's slides or something like that. So it can be a nice option for that. And so I've got that. Then the other microphone that I have I have a lavalier or lapel mic. And so let me turn off the lower third here, and you can see that that's right here on my shirt. And so that allows me to have flexibility to move around. So you've probably heard me as I've rotated around, showing you different aspects of the studio. My volume has probably gone up and down, and the quality has diminished because if I'm not speaking straight to the camera, then the shotgun microphone isn't picking me up as well, because the shotgun mic is pretty directional to where I'm at. Whereas with the lapel mic, I can turn, and you shouldn't be noticing a huge difference in my voice. You may get slightly different because the sound will bounce differently off of things, but the overall volume level should be fairly similar. And so it's nice to be able to have something like that where you have that flexibility, particularly if you're going to be moving around, or maybe you've got a stand-up desk that you're using your video for, and so you may be moving side to side more, and so you may be having that in and out sound that you'll sometimes see presenters have if they're using a fixed location mic. So this is something that moves with you. You will notice that there's going to be a bit of a difference if I turn down and I start talking while I'm looking at something on the desk. That can't really be avoided because you're getting closer in proximity to the microphone, but in general, this can be a good option. The other nice thing about the lapel mic is that it allows me to get up and move around. And so I'm going to give you a view of the studio here, and we'll be standing up. So let me switch over to the iPhone view. And if I shift over to the iPhone, then you can see that I can move around the studio, and you should be able to continue to hear me just fine because I'm on the lapel mic with a nice long cable. And so you can see different elements of the studio from a different angle. And you've seen some of these in that still shot that I've been using to talk about the studio. But if you look here, you can see, for example, up near the top of the studio, you can see that as I continue around to an area that's not in the primary shot, I didn't wallpaper that part, it's just clipped on. And so it does cover up the wallpaper, but it's not meant to be quite as permanent. And up here you can also see that I've got a simple file folder that I've used to deflect some of the light. You may be able to see back there, I've got a construction lamp that I use just to provide a little bit of light behind the scene. And I didn't want to use a more expensive light for that because frankly I didn't need it. I just needed to make the corner a little bit less dark, and so putting that light up there gave just enough light bouncing off the ceiling to brighten up that corner a bit. And I used the folder because I didn't want the light to come squarely onto me because as a bald guy I don't really need a hair light. It just looks glary off the top of my head. So here you can see a little bit more clearly the camcorder. So that gives you a feel for what that's like. It's kind of beaten up. It's gotten a lot of use over the years. The monitors that I use are set up on stands so that they kind of are up off the desk, and I can really control the locations of them. And as we rotate around, you can clearly see the boom arms for the microphones, and then of course the PC that does all of the hard work and heavy lifting. So let's go ahead, without making you seasick by moving too quickly, we'll wander back here to the main camera position, and we'll shift over to the primary view. And you'll see one of the nice things about this Sony camera is it autofocuses very quickly, which is nice, and it gives me the ability to move. And so if I wanted to show you, for example, this remote control, as long as I get it in the center of the screen, well, let's see. Now that I say that, of course, it's not going to focus quickly because that's how live video is, folks. It is not going to focus on me. All right. Well, normally it focuses very quickly, but today it didn't want to do that for me. So let's see. Let's take a look at a few other things here before we wrap up for the day. And if you do have any questions, I'm happy to take them as we go here. The PC that you just saw, that is a really old computer. It's one that I built back in 2014, so 6 years ago. At the time, it was a high-end machine, which is the only reason why I'm still able to use it today for this video streaming. It is an Intel i7 4790K, for those of you who are tech geeks out there. It is 4 cores. It still holds its own against some of the lower end processors out there today, but it is by no means the kind of thing that I would go out and buy today. I would say it just barely keeps up with what I'm doing here with all of these cameras and some of the intro videos and things like that I have as part of the production. So, you have to look at your computer and figure out if it's going to let you do what you want it to do. If you're using a product like StreamYard, that offloads a lot of the processing elsewhere, and if you're just using the one camera angle, that can be fine. And so StreamYard is a great solution. I personally use this product called vMix, and we'll go ahead and bring up the iPhone so that you can, again, see the screen. And so vMix here is the application here on the right. That is basically, it's like a little video studio, and so it's got all of the different inputs that I can use and split screens and that sort of thing. I use it for the Agency Leadership Podcast with Gini Dietrich, and it gives me a lot of flexibility in some of the production that I do. But it certainly does require a fair amount of computer horsepower to get the job done. And so if I had a lesser powered machine, I would probably be looking at something like StreamYard. StreamYard is a great application, and I do use StreamYard, particularly if I've got multiple guests, or if I'm doing something where I want the guest to be able to share a screen, or I'm working with someone who may not be quite as technical, because vMix does have the ability to bring people in, and you're going to get higher quality than you would get off of StreamYard, but the ease of use of StreamYard is something that you can't overlook, and so there is a time and place for it, and I do use that. It doesn't have the same level of flexibility. I can't do these lower thirds, for example, in StreamYard the same way that I can do them here. And so you're going to lose some functionality, but it may be worth the trade-off for the ease of use, particularly if you don't have a strong computer to use. Let's see, what else can I tell you about that I've got around here that might be helpful? Let's go ahead and let's bring up that article to see what I might have overlooked as we've been. Oh, I know, I haven't shown you. So the audio that I've got here is being processed. So it's not coming to you just raw from the microphones. All of these microphones that I've shown you today are what are called XLR microphones, and they go into a mixer, an audio mixer. And so you can see here what the mixer looks like. It's sort of like a soundboard that you might see at an event, but obviously much more downscale than that. And so in addition to going into that where I can control volume levels, it also is connected to a couple of audio processors. So this Aphex and the DBX device that I mentioned in the article apply things like compression and gating, things that just improve the audio quality. It's not something that a lot of you are probably going to notice or get too wound up about, but it is something that I enjoy. What I do like here and what I do recommend for folks is this top thing, all of these power switches. This is a rack mountable power center, and there's a variety of different ones that you can get out there, but they're really nice because it allows me to turn on and off the individual lights and devices and cameras all while sitting here in my seat. So at just an arm's reach, I can turn these all on and off, which is really convenient so that I can just fire up a couple of things and jump right into a video presentation of some sort. And it doesn't require me running around, plugging things in, reaching underneath the desk to turn on various power switches, because all of these things have power switches in odd places. And so it's super convenient to have something like that. I also have almost all of the background lights hooked up to the Amazon device, whose name I will not say because I don't want her to respond to me. But it does allow me to turn on and off the shelf lighting, the desk lighting, and some of those things, and the room lighting as well, which is convenient. So the more things that you can find to make it easier, the more likely you are to be creating video. And I think the key message that I would give you is I've shown you a lot of things today. I've shown you a lot of capabilities in this studio, but at the end of the day, it's all about creating great content. And so you want to focus on doing whatever it takes to create the content. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that video has been a great way to connect with people, to reconnect with people. It made me some new connections. It's also accelerated the sales process. People who have seen me on video have a chance to listen to me and understand how I think and the advice that I give. And so it means that typically if I'm in a sales conversation, it will go much more quickly and smoothly if they've seen some of the video. And of course, you can use the video for all sorts of purposes. We're doing it here as a live stream, but I also do recorded things. You can use video to do personal messages to people. There's a number of products out there that allow you to do those. We're all using video in our day-to-day as far as Zoom and Skype calls. So I would encourage all of you to try to figure out how you can improve the quality of the video that you're creating, whether it's for yourself or your clients. Many of us are having situations where we're helping clients with events, or perhaps they're doing a media tour or a press availability. And so we need to help them on their video elements. And so that's all important as well. And so the more that we can learn about video, the more effective that we can be in communicating in the way that most of us are going to be doing a lot of our communications for the foreseeable future. I haven't been able to cover everything that's in the article, but hopefully if you have additional questions, the article will help to answer them. If I've overlooked something that you want to know about, just drop me an email, chip@agencyleadership.com. I'm always happy to talk about video. As you can tell from this presentation, I'm pretty geeky about it and like to delve into some of the finer details of, well, not just video production, but video, audio, computers, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to geek out, feel free to reach out to me. As always, you can find previous video replays from all of our past live streams and recorded videos at agencyleadership.tv. You can join our Slack community for agency leaders and get other resources by joining the free Agency Leadership Council at agencyleadership.com/join. We're here Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern Time. This Friday, we'll be back with the weekly Q&A session. If you've got questions that you'd like to share, use the Ask Chip functionality on the Agency Leadership website. Drop me an email, chip@agencyleadership.com. Ask a question in the Slack community. However you want to get the question to me, I'm happy to answer it. Or, of course, you're welcome to join live and ask your question in the comments or chat during the session. So, I hope I've helped you advance your video knowledge. I hope that you are going to go out and create some more videos. If you do, send me some links. I'd love to see what you all are up to. And with that, we'll bring today's episode to a close, and I'll see you all back here on Friday.